Welcome back to our discussion of organic molecules. This time what I'd like to do is I'd like to talk about the classes of macromolecules that are found in cells. You might also see these referred to as biologically important macromolecules. Also notice that we're going to be talking about two ways of thinking about this: the individual subunits of the molecules and then the chains that I can build from those subunits. So monomers and polymers we're also going to discuss. First of all, you want to think about the molecules that make up living things as being sort of part of that hierarchy that we talked about in our chapter 1. The idea that I can take small subunits and hook them together to make larger things. And we're going to see that in this particular case in our discussion of these biologically important macromolecules. And so macromolecules are large molecules that are composed of subunits, of smaller molecules hooked together. They typically have a very complex structure. And since they're made up of building blocks, we're going to want to think about how do we hook those building blocks together? What types of building blocks are there? And then what's the name for the attachment that occurs to make that chain, to hook those subunits together? All right, so let's consider that macromolecules could be thought of as a type of a polymer. Now the word polymer just means multiple units, polymer. And they're made out of monomers, monomer 1 unit. Now, 3 of the classes of biologically important macromolecules are thought of as being polymers, long chains of monomers hooked together to give us a wide variety of large macromolecules. So a polymer is going to be a large molecule, a long molecule, consisting of many similar building blocks called monomers. Now, the analogy of a train is appropriate here. Each individual car of the train would be a monomer. The train itself then would be the polymer. So that's what we're going to be looking at, building long chains of individual subunits. Now, how do I do this? How do I do this building process? How do I link them together? Well, the key chemical reaction that we're going to see used to construct, to put together the subunits of all of the classes of macromolecules we're going to talk about is a chemical reaction called dehydration synthesis. It's also sometimes referred to as a condensation reaction. Now, I like dehydration synthesis because of what that name tells me. Look what it's saying. It's saying that I'm dehydrating the molecule, which means that I'm removing water. And the result of removing that water, by the way, notice where the water came from. It came from using atoms from 2 of the subunits that are going to be connected to each other. They're going to be linked to each other. So dehydration, I'm removing water from the molecule. And what am I doing? I'm linking things together, and we said that was the general definition of a synthesis reaction. So dehydration synthesis reactions are what are we going to see associated with taking subunits of macromolecules and hooking them together to make the macromolecular structure. All right, what if I want to take it apart? Well, as you might expect, I'm going to have to reverse that process. I'm going to have to add back to those subunits the atoms that were removed when I hooked them together. And so notice once again, here we have our water molecule that's being added to the long polymer, and by adding it, that allows me to separate the subunits of that macromolecule. Notice the name, hydrolysis. Hydrolysis is how we pronounce it. But take it apart, hydrolysis, which means lysis, to split, hydro with water. And so we're going to see hydrolysis as the key chemical reaction that's going to be used to subdivide or take apart macromolecules. And we'll see it over and over again as we talk about the 4 major classes of macromolecules. In each case, we are going to see dehydration synthesis making bonds, hydrolysis breaking bonds. It is a type of decomposition reaction, isn't it? Remember what we said that was, taking something and breaking it apart into its pieces. All right? What kind of polymers are we going to see this semester? What kind of molecules are we going to find as we discuss these macromolecules that are long chains? Well, we're going to see three classes of biologically important macromolecules that could be classified as polymers. The proteins, which have amino acid monomers. The carbohydrates, which have monosaccharide monomers. By the way, monosaccharides might also be called simple sugars. And the nucleic acids, which have nucleotides as their monomers, their subunits. Now, there is a fourth class of macromolecule, the lipids, and they're not thought of as being a polymer because they don't have that repeated subunit makeup making a long chain. We will find, however, that the lipids, when we talk about them, that their subunits get hooked together and taken apart by the very same chemical reactions we just talked about. Right? Hook them together, dehydration synthesis, take them apart, hydrolysis. They're not going to fit the definition, however, of a polymer. They are, however, a biologically important macromolecule. All right, so even though we're going to find the same kinds of monomers in all living things, the way in which you hook them together, the order that you hook them together, the kind of bond you form when you do dehydration synthesis means that we're going to have an enormous variety of polymers found in living things. We're going to find some of the same polymers common in almost all living things, and we're going to find some specific, special types of polymers in certain living things. But basically, all this variation in the polymers are built from a relatively small set of monomers. All right, so very quickly, what have we done? We talked about this idea of making large molecules from small molecules, that we have these small building blocks called monomers, and then we can hook them together to make larger, more complex molecules called polymers. We hook them together by carrying out a chemical reaction called dehydration synthesis. We take them apart by utilizing a chemical reaction called hydrolysis. And remember, we mentioned that lipids, even though they're not polymers, their subunits are also attached and taken apart with that same pair of chemical reactions. Keep this in mind and look for these features as you then go to cover the four classes of macromolecules in the next 4 videos. Thank you very much.